It's the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 25, looking at the groups and teams of Euro 2024. This episode is looking at Group D, France, Austria, Netherlands, and Poland. Here we go! It's the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada, Series 25. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor. And today we are looking at Group D for the Euro Cup 2024 tournament. This group is made up of France, Austria, Netherlands, and Poland.
Yeah, we're currently focused on the 2024 Euro Cup and Copa America. Both of those played in June 2024. And we're producing this group and team series as well as a player series for each. There are two parts to this media cast.
So in part one, we will give a summary of each team's World and Euro Cup histories. We'll also take a bit of a closer look at their recent history and form, including how they qualified for this tournament.
Yeah, and in part two, we'll look at the teams in comparison to each other in the groups, looking at their rankings, head-to-head history, and their chances of success. And we'll end with a discussion of their prospects and our predictions.
All right, let's jump into it.
Okay, let's begin with France. There we go. So the broader history, France has out of prominence, but they are marked by four strong periods. Around 1958, led by Just Fontaine. The 1980s, led by Michel Platini, featuring their first Euro Cup title. Third is the turn of the millennium, including an afterflash in 2006, led by Zinedine Zidane, a period which featured their first World Cup title and their second Euro Cup title. And fourthly, recent times, which is not defined by a single player, but which features their second World Cup title and second place finishes in both major tournaments. In between, though, they were often weak, failing to qualify or getting knocked out at the group stage. Their biggest valley was 1962 to 1980, where they failed to reach 8 out of 10 tournaments and were knocked out in the first round of the only two that they did reach, those in 1966 and 1978 World Cups both. They also failed to reach 3 of 4 cups between 1988 and 1994, but that was the last time they missed a cup.
So the period from 2008 to 2014 was flat and uninspiring, rather than being a period of notable weakness. But as has always been the case, hosting pulled them out of it, and second place in the 2016 Euro Cup was followed by a World Cup win in 2018. Euro 2020 was a disappointing round of 16 finish, but the 2022 World Cup saw them in the final once more. But if final results are generally impressive, qualification runs are not as consistent, as England and Spain say, and invariably feature a few drop points. And the 2022-23 Nations League campaign also showed some fragility.
All right, well, let's take a look at how they reached this tournament, their qualifying campaign for this one. And do you want to take us through that?
Yeah, this was quite a strong campaign. They won their first 7 out of 8 qualifying games. Their final result was a 2-2 draw in Greece with qualification already assured. Notably, France won home and away against the Netherlands, which is one of the teams they're paired with in this group.
Yeah, right. And we turn our attention to the Netherlands, but they're actually the pot 3 team. So it's Austria up next. And let's take a look at their longer history. So Austria was a strong team in the early days, even if their participation was inconsistent. They were arguably present in the 1938 World Cup because some of their best players were absorbed by the Nazi Germany team. They earned their best results with a 4th place finish in the 1934 World Cup and a 3rd place finish in the 1954 edition. By the time the Euro Cup started in 1960, they had lost that strength and were not qualifying for competitions. While they did have a resurgence in World Cup play in 1978, reaching the quarterfinals for 2 cups in a row, that did not register in Euro Cup qualification. Even in the 1990s, when they reached 2 more World Cups, they still hadn't reached a Euro Cup. In 2008, though, the situation reversed. They reached 3 of the 4 Euro Cups from that time, but have not come close to reaching a World Cup.
Yeah, interesting history.
Mm-hmm.
Austria's fortunes turned with a tremendous qualification run for the 2016 Euro Cup and continued into 2020 when they passed the Euro Cup group stage for the first time. Oddly, but consistent with a history of non-correlation between the 2 cups, they finished 4th in their qualifying groups for the 2018 and 2022 World Cups, so disappointing campaigns there. 2022 looked better than it was, as they did reach a playoff round, but that was due to their UEFA Nations League performance in 2020-21 when they were promoted to League A. In the following 2022-23 Nations League season, though, they proved out of their depth and were demoted back to League B. Euro Cup form continues to be their strong point as they qualified quite convincingly for yet another cup in 2024, and we'll have a look at that.
Yeah, let's take a look at that. So their qualifying campaign for this cup.
Yeah, so Austria finished 2nd in their group, just a point behind Belgium, who bested them. But those were Austria's only drop points. They otherwise won all 6 of their games against Azerbaijan, Estonia, and Sweden, who on paper would have been their nearest challengers.
Yeah, Sweden was pretty poor in that campaign, but a good result there for Austria. Okay, let's move on to our third team, as promised, the Netherlands. And we'll begin with their kind of broader history. So Netherlands was a weak team in the early years. That they reached 2 World Cups in the 1930s is a bit deceptive, since they played only 1 game in each of them and lost both of those games. They remained a non-entity after the war, not qualifying for either cup until 1974, when they burst onto the scene. Great success in that decade, 2 second-place finishes in the World Cup and a semi-final finish in their first Euro Cup appearance in 1976, ended as suddenly as it had begun, and they were back to being a second-tier team. A surprise Euro Cup in 1988, where they won, set them on track for the next 25 years. They never fell at the group stage in all those years, with one exception of not reaching the World Cup in 2002. And they reached the semi-finals regularly in both competitions, peaking with yet another second-place finish in the 2010 World Cup. But cracks began to show from 2012, infighting within the team, at least part of the problem. They failed to qualify for 3 of 4 cups between 2012 and 2018, although they did earn 3rd place in the single one they reached, the 2014 World Cup.
After a terrible period from 2015, missing 2 major tournaments in a row, and that includes the expanded Euros in 2016, they had returned to passing the group stage of tournaments, though below the level they had fairly consistently kept from 1988 onwards. That they fell so unexpectedly in the round of 16 in 2020, after looking so strong in the group stage, is a worry, showing that they're still capable of lapses. Perhaps a factor was that, again, the team dynamics, as there was a lot of dissent over the manager, at least among the fans. A quarterfinal finish in the 2022 World Cup was followed by a top showing in the 2022-23 UEFA Nations League A, where they reached the Final 4, which shows signs of them getting back on track.
All right, well, let's see how they did in qualification for this tournament.
Yeah, we already mentioned that they were grouped with France, who beat them twice, but those were the Netherlands' only 2 losses, otherwise winning all matches against Ireland, Greece, and Gibraltar. So in the end, it was a comfortable qualification, albeit in 2nd place behind France.
All right, let's move on to our fourth team, Poland. And we'll take a look at their history. Poland's first World Cup qualification was in 1938. It's an oddity that they didn't reach the Euro Cup during their strong periods in World Cup play, especially in the 1970s and 80s. That period featured spectacular results, winning 11 of 12 group stage games over 4 World Cups and reaching the final stages every time, and peaking with a third place finish twice. They also failed to reach the Euro Cup around the turn of the century, when they reached the World Cup twice. They finally managed to get to the Euro Cup in 2008 and actually have qualified every time since. But apart from 2016, where they reached the quarterfinal, they've proven weak, winning no games and only a handful of draws. After missing 2 World Cups in 2010 and 2014, they've returned to that competition for the last 2 editions.
Poland's current period is one of consistency rather than strength. But though it is an impressive period in terms of strong qualification runs, it is for the most part bland and disappointing in the actual tournaments. Only 2016 met the expectations of fans, undefeated in the Euro Cup group stage, and then 2 penalty shootouts in the final stages. Group stage exits in the next 2 cups were followed by an equally dull World Cup 2022, though they did reach the round of 16 there. Their 2022-23 UEFA Nations League A showed them a bit out of their depth against top-tier teams, but they did beat Wales twice to avoid relegation.
All right, let's see how they did in qualification for this tournament.
Yeah, it was a bit of an inconsistent campaign for Poland. They lost their first 3 road matches against Czech Republic, Moldova, and Albania, managing only an away win in Faroe Islands, but they were undefeated at home. However, just 3 wins from their 8 games saw them with a 3rd place finish, 4 points back of both Albania and Czech Republic, which meant that they relied on their Nations League record to go into a playoff. In that playoff, they were first paired with Estonia, who they beat convincingly 5-1. And then in the final match, they were paired with Wales. That match played in Cardiff, in Wales. And a 0-0 game ended with a victorious penalty shootout, 5-4 for Poland.
Yeah, we watched that game and it hurt. We are Wales fans because I grew up in Wales. What did you make of it, Connor?
Yeah, it was disappointing, obviously, for Welsh fans. I mean, Poland, it wasn't the greatest game. I feel one strange thing that we talked about was the fact that this one-off final game was played in Wales and not a neutral location, which you feel might have disadvantaged Poland. But in the end, they got through the penalty shootout and kind of the scourge of Wales, as we've already seen, beating them twice in the Nations League as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, well, that is the end of part 1. So we move on to part 2, where we kind of compare the teams on a few different bases. And the first one is the pot order, which may strike some people as a bit curious.
Yeah, pots were decided not by world rankings, as is typical, but rather by performance in qualification. So France actually had the 2nd best qualification record of any team. So they were put in pot 1. Only Portugal had a better qualifying record. And then it was Austria who were in pot 2. They just squeaked in at the bottom of pot 2 with a respectable campaign where they finished just a point back of group winners Belgium. Netherlands come from the top of pot 3. So Austria and Netherlands were in different pots, but actually just 1 place separates them in their rankings. And then the pot 4 team is Poland. All the playoff teams, there were 3 of them, automatically assigned to pot 4.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, let's look at the rankings because, as you say, usually the pot order is decided by that. So we're looking at the kind of the general strength of the team.
Yeah, so starting with France, they are 2nd in both the FIFA and the ELO rankings, which are the 2 ranking systems we look at. And since their World Cup win in 2018, they've actually never fallen out of the top 4 in either rankings. So they've been consistently among typically the top 2 or 3 teams in the world, according to those ranking systems.
Yeah, they sometimes do take heavy drops due to kind of lapses in their group stage games, but we'll get to that when we discuss the team.
Yeah, I guess with 2 World Cup finals, they are inarguably one of the top teams in the world at the moment.
Definitely.
The pot 2 team is Austria. They're ranked 24th in FIFA and a little bit higher at 18th in ELO. Typically, they're probably in the 20s and 30s overall, so a decent team, but not always qualifying for cups, but have moved up a little bit recently with their strong qualification campaign.
Yeah, they've reached a few cups in a row now, so have moved into the 20s fairly comfortably, but they were actually in the 30s, dipped into the 30s a couple of years ago. Let's move on to the Netherlands.
Yeah, the Netherlands are 6th in FIFA and 10th in ELO. The top 10 is where they usually find themselves, but they have dipped kind of like France based on some lapses and a couple of non-qualifications for cups, as we've seen kind of from over the last probably 5 to 10 years, saw them drop to as low as 32nd in the FIFA rankings in June 2017. But that's more of an aberration, as they're typically around the top 10, or if not kind of comfortably in it.
Yeah, that drop to 32nd in the FIFA ranking is 17th in the ELO rankings. Once again, I would tend to agree with the ELO. They've never really been out of the top 20.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And ELO has been more consistent. And then the final team is Poland. Poland also have had some ups and downs. They're currently 31st in FIFA and 40th in ELO. They're often around the 20 to 30 mark in both systems, which is kind of consistent with a team that makes it to the World Cup, but not necessarily progressing from the group stage.
Yeah, that's right. And around 2016, with that good performance in the Euro Cup, they did kind of jump up, but generally not that good in the Cup. So back down to 20. I mean, what they're currently at now, 31st and 40th, is a bit low, maybe because of that weak qualification, hey?
I agree. And it represents a little bit of a drop from the 20s in both systems just a year ago. So yeah, a poor campaign seeing them drop a little bit, but will probably boost up again after the tournament.
Right. Okay, let's move on to our next metric, which is head-to-heads, and we begin with France versus Australia.
Austria.
Sorry, what am I talking about? France versus Austria.
Yeah, so we're looking at World Cup and Euro Cup qualification and finals. And France and Austria have met 8 times. France have won 6, but Austria have managed 2 wins.
Yeah, and one of those wins was actually in 2010 World Cup qualifying. We're not including Nations League games at this point in our analysis here, but I should point out that they played in the 2022-23 Nations League there, and France bested Austria there, but Austria did get a tie in one of the games.
That's right. Moving on to France versus the Netherlands, they've met 9 times competitively. France has won 6 and the Netherlands 3.
Yeah, and significantly, they were in qualifying together. We saw that France won both of their games. They were also in qualifying together for the 2018 World Cup. France won both of those games too. So France definitely dominating overall, but particularly recently.
Yeah, and both those 2 campaigns you mentioned included 4-0 home wins for France. So yeah, dominant recently.
Wow, yeah. Okay, moving on, we have France versus Poland.
Yeah, this record is relatively even. France with 3 wins from 6 matches, 2 draws, and it's 1 victory for Poland.
Yeah, they tied twice in 1996, and that was Euro qualifying, and didn't meet again until the round of 16 in the 2022 World Cup, and France won that game.
Yeah, 3-1.
Okay, moving on to Netherlands versus Austria.
Netherlands has won half of their meetings. That's 4 out of 8. Austria with 2 draws and 2 victories as well.
Yeah, then they really haven't met recently, only once in 2020 Euro Cup group stage, and that was in the Netherlands. The tournament wasn't in the Netherlands, but that particular game was played in the Netherlands, and they won 2-0. I think most of Austria's good results here come in the early years.
Yeah.
Okay, Netherlands versus Poland.
Netherlands and Poland. Yeah, Poland also have a pretty good showing against the Netherlands, as they do against France. Netherlands have won 4 times, but there's been 3 draws and it's 3 victories for Poland.
Yeah, and actually these two didn't meet since 1994. However, again, in the 2022-23 Nations League, they met. We're not counting that in the results here, but just like Austria against France, Poland did manage a tie with Netherlands, but were bested. All right, and then the final pairing is Poland versus Austria.
Yes, there've been 5 matches. Poland has 3 wins, 2 draws, and no defeats.
Right, so Austria have never beaten Poland. They did meet in the 2020 Euro Cup qualifying campaign, and there Poland bested Austria. Austria again getting a draw out of it, but coming out the loser. Okay, let's move on to our next metric. That is odds, and we don't have actually odds for winning the group, so we have to go with what we got, which is odds to win the tournament outright. But it will give us a chance to kind of compare them relatively.
That's right. So France have the best odds at 22%. That may be the top odds of any team in the tournament. But 22% odds for France. Netherlands are significantly back at just 5.7%. And then Austria are given 1.4% and Poland just 0.4%. So they're furthest behind.
Yeah, France is actually second. I'm a bit surprised by who's first. Any guess? Not to put you on the spot or anything.
I know it's not Germany because we've already covered them. Is it perhaps England?
Yeah, it is England with just slightly higher odds than France.
Wow.
Not sure I agree with that, but that's beyond our scope here. Okay, well, those odds actually delineate teams quite a lot. So let's begin with the broader picture. Do you think it's as clear as that, or do you think there's a possibility for upset there?
I think there's possibility for upset. I don't think it's probably as clear as those odds suggest. I think at the bottom, I think Austria and Poland are a little bit closer. I wouldn't kind of give Austria as much of a lead in odds. And, France, I mean, they are the dominant team in probably European football, you would argue, at the moment, or I would argue. Whether they're that much stronger than the other teams in this group, particularly the Netherlands, I mean, I guess they have the qualification results to see it, but I probably see the group being a little bit closer, though I would expect France out of any of these teams to be the most likely to go on a deep run in the tournament.
Yeah, I think the only threat for France is the penchant once in a while for poor campaigns. In terms of talent, they're immensely talented. Just a question which is maybe a bit off topic, but we've seen that their 3 previous strong periods were defined, by an outstanding name. Do you think anyone is here on the French team?
I mean, you could say Mbappe. He was only, I think he was 18 or 19 at that first World Cup. So, if they dominate for a long time, then you probably, looking back, could say Mbappe because he's been kind of there throughout it all. But he's so young and they have such a a depth of player. I would say it's more down to overall depth than kind of a single talisman.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you say, he's young, so he may emerge as the defining player of this generation, but perhaps a bit too early to say that. Yeah, I'm thinking, the biggest threat, of course, would be the Netherlands, but they beat them twice in qualifying. We saw they beat them twice in 2018. So, yeah, unless there is some kind of a lapse, it's hard to see France not winning the group.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the Netherlands, you say, is their biggest threat. Perhaps their biggest threat is themselves.
Yeah.
Switching off. I mean, even in the World Cup, when they got to the final, they did suffer a defeat to Tunisia. It didn't really cost them, but it was a lapse nonetheless. Which could have bumped them out of first place in the group, though it didn't. But yeah, really, they're the team to beat. You would say Netherlands are the stiffest competition, but then as you mentioned, their record over the Netherlands recently has been so dominant, it's really hard to predict the Netherlands getting the better of them here.
Right. Well, speaking of the Netherlands, the odds put them as a shoe-in for second place. And do you expect that, or do you see any threat from Austria or Poland?
I would expect it from the Netherlands. I think Austria and Poland, there's maybe marks against them. Poland's qualifying campaign wasn't particularly strong. They don't often emerge out of the group either. Austria as well are a team that doesn't get to a lot of tournaments. And then even here, their Nations League show them out of their depth against top tier teams. And unfortunately for both Austria and Poland, they are facing two top tier teams in this group. So I really don't see that much of a possibility for upset.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll come back to that, how they do against top tier teams in a little bit. But for my part, I think Netherlands, I don't hear much about kind of infighting on the team, which often kind of undermines them. But one thing I was thinking about is you said of Belgium in a previous podcast that, countries of that size tend to kind of have good periods and weak periods. Netherlands did have one kind of post-war. It took them until 1970, and then they had the 1970s, and then they had another valley after that. It's been a long, good run since 1988 until the recent mid 2010 shocking non-qualifications for cups. But overall, do you see them as a kind of a strong team, a top-tier team, or a team that is, kind of in a good patch, even if it's a long one?
I would say generally a top tier team, though not always consistently so. And we see that with some non-qualifications, including not qualifying for the 2016 Euros when that was a 2014 tournament. So that was really shocking. So they do have their bad periods, but I think they generally bounce back relatively quickly. I think in terms of players, I mean, they do produce good players fairly consistently. I would say now, probably on paper, they're not as strong as they've been in recent years. When they had, Van Persie, going further back, Van Nistelrooy, Bergkamp, when they had some really elite players. They have some great players, particularly in defense, but probably, arguably no one who's kind of dominating like in their domestic league in terms of goal scoring or things like that. So yeah, they're probably not on paper strong as they've been in the past, but I think even so, they're still considered a top team. And they still tend to get good results and be competitive with the top teams.
Yeah, well, we can only predict kind of based on their, on their record. There's always a propensity for teams to perform poorly in the cup or to perform well, but you can't really predict that. It seems to me that France and Netherlands are kind of in the top tier, if we could call it Nations League A tier. And even though Poland is in that tier, they and Austria kind of a second tier team. So it could be an exceptional performance by Austria or Poland, but it's not really to be predicted. Do you see either of them doing better than a second tier team though?
Not really. I don't really think there's been recent signs to show that. I think the Nations League is kind of a good test for them at playing against elite teams. And both of them kind of struggled. Poland had 2 wins against Wales, but they themselves are not top tier. Conversely, just going back to the Netherlands, the fact that they won their Nations League group does point to top tier, because it's very hard to do that among a group of 4 really strong teams. So I think that's an argument for the Netherlands, even if I would argue on paper they're not as strong as they've been in the past. But for Austria and Poland, I don't see these teams as having a huge history in tournaments of pulling off major surprises. They kind of maybe get out of the group, maybe don't. They're not really looking a team that goes deep in tournaments. So yeah, I don't see them as being really strong like finals teams, and certainly not strong enough to rise to the level of Netherlands or France in this group.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, though, that I do see Austria as a bit more likely to upset if there is going to be an upset. I mean, they challenged Portugal in 2016. Portugal ended up winning, but they tied Portugal in the group stage. And they also kind of menaced Italy in 2020, also the champions, taking them to extra time. I'm not sure if it was extra time or penalties there, but they did challenge the top tier teams a little bit, whereas I don't really see Poland having done so.
Yeah, no, you make a good point with Austria, putting up a good fight, valiant but ultimately unsuccessful effort. So you do make a point there. Do you see either Austria or Poland being able to nick second place?
No, I don't. I even think it might be tough to get third place unless it's with 3 points, one of them beating the other. I would favor Austria to beat Poland, but it seemed on the surface that 3 points would be the max. So I think in this group, a third place advancer, I don't really see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and goal if they each manage one, or one of the teams, I guess, manages a single win and ends with 3 points in third place, it might come down to goal difference then. So they would have to, for both Austria and Poland, I think it's imperative that they keep the scores down against France and Netherlands if they're not able to get a better result or get a draw.
Yeah, good point. I mean, I normally see Austria and Poland as fairly equal teams. It's just that Poland really doesn't perform well in cups, other than the 2016 Euro Cups. They've been knocked out at the group stage. In 2022 World Cup, they did pass the group stage, but it was still kind of a flat performance. And as I recall, that came down to Mexico scoring or not scoring a late goal that kind of squeaked them through. So not convincing even when they passed the group stage in 2022.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted to talk. We usually put a fair bit of stock in the ELO rankings, which has France and Netherlands second and sixth, respectively. But then it has Austria 18th and Poland 40th. So quite a discrepancy. Do you agree with that, or do you find that troubling?
I find it troubling in terms of their overall strength, but Poland is better in qualifying than they are in tournaments. And as we saw, Austria have kind of challenged or troubled top tier teams. So honestly, in terms of this cup, I almost agree with it. I think it's a bit too extreme. Maybe the FIFA rankings there, which have 24 for Austria and Poland in 31st, a bit more reasonable. How about you?
Yeah, I probably put them a little bit more similarly, but as we've been talking, I've kind of been a little bit more convinced in Austria. You swayed me a little bit, recalling some of their good performances in the cups. So it's certainly possible. But in general, I view them pretty even, and I actually view the likelihood of a self-defeating draw,
Yeah.
quite possible in this group, which of course would not be a result that suits either team.
Yeah, that's true. Well, before I try to pin you down on your final order, something you always seem to want to evade, I just want to talk in terms of how far these teams can go in the tournament. Obviously, I think we can agree that France is a finalist prospect.
Absolutely. And France, I mean, in their last 2 World Cup campaigns, they've beaten really good teams to get there. They've beaten England in the last World Cup. Previously, it was Belgium and Croatia. I forget who it was in the semifinals, but when they come across the really big teams when it matters, they seem to do well. And obviously they lost the most recent World Cup, quite narrowly. So I think France, I think they're the team, even more so than England, or even more so than host Germany. I think they're the team that everyone will want to avoid. So I see the final and possibly winning it, quite possible.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes with my daughters or with my students, I put it this way. I ask, for example, on a test, what score would you be disappointed with? What do you expect, and what would you be delighted with? What score or what result do you think France would be disappointed or expectant of?
I think France would be disappointed with anything less than the semifinals. I think they would probably expect the finals and then obviously hope to win it.
Yeah.
Maybe even the final would be their expectation, given that they've reached 2 World Cup finals in a row. But I think once you get to the semifinals, it kind of depends on who you face and perhaps injuries and suspensions and things like that. There's a lot of other factors that can sway a tight game.
Yeah, I agree with you there. How about Netherlands? Where do you think their expectations would lie?
Yeah, I think they're a team that can get hot, but can also be a bit flat. So they're a bit tough to predict. I do think they'll get out of the group in second place, which could set them up with a slightly difficult tie in the next round. I think quarterfinals is probably realistic for them. I think they would be delighted to get to the semifinals, and I think round of 16 would be disappointing. But I kind of see quarterfinals, which is what they reach in the World Cup, as kind of where they'll end up.
Yeah, I'm exactly with you there. Quarterfinals for the expected level. In terms of Austria and Poland, my thinking is that they would pretty much be delighted to get out of the group stage.
I totally agree. I think in this group, they're going to understand they're not favorites or second favorites. So, third place is probably what's up for grab, and they would be, either team I think would be happy to get that and get through. I think second place would be a delight and would make for a fabulous tournament, regardless of what happens in the knockout round.
Good, well put. Okay, let's finish then by kind of finally nailing you down on your order. What's your prediction for this group, Connor?
I'm going to say France first and Netherlands second. And then I kind of view Poland and Austria as almost the same. I almost see them being tied on points at the end. Perhaps you have swayed me with Austria, but I'll maybe say Poland just to be a bit different, and because of Lewandowski, who, though he doesn't always show up in a big tournament, might prove crucial in the game between the two of them.
All right. Well, we are a bit different, but mostly the same. I think France, Netherlands. I do give an edge over Austria, not so much because Austria is better, but because Poland always seems to be flat to me in tournaments and kind of disappoint. So I'm sure Polish fans will be hoping for a more representative showing from Poland, but they just don't seem to bring it to the cup.
One argument I'll make in favor of Poland is they often qualify extremely well and then are flat. This time they've qualified by the skin of their teeth, so maybe that means they'll have a great showing at the tournament.
Yeah, well, it goes that way sometimes. Good talking to you about this, Connor, and we'll see you again when we take a look at Group E.
You bet, I'll see you then.
We would like to thank Mike Tripak, Make Sound Music, and Pixabay for the wonderful background music called Dance 90s accompanying this media cast.